Give a normal person a uniform, a title, and permission. Watch what happens next. You would like to believe you already know the answer. You would like to believe you would refuse. But in 1971, in a basement at Stanford University, ordinary young men proved that most of us are wrong about ourselves. And the real answer is far stranger than some people are just bad. Here is what actually happened. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo took 24 college students, screened for good mental health, no criminal history, no signs of aggression. Coin flip. Half became guards, half became prisoners. A mock prison was built in a university basement. The experiment was supposed to run for 2 weeks. It was shut down in 6 days. Why? Because the guards, ordinary students with no history of cruelty, began escalating sleep deprivation, humiliating tasks, psychological pressure that had not been part of the original instructions. They were not told to do this. Nobody handed them a script for cruelty. They built it themselves inside a system that told them, quietly and constantly, that this was simply their role now. And the prisoners? Several suffered real psychological distress. One was released after 36 hours, showing symptoms Zimbardo described as acute emotional breakdown. This was not acting. This was not a game gone slightly too far. Actual human beings, inside a fake prison, with no real bars and no real consequences, began behaving as though the walls were real, because the roles around them had become real. Zimbardo's conclusion reshaped how psychologists understood human behavior. He argued that situations do not just influence people. Situations can override personality almost entirely. Give a good person a bad enough system, and the system usually wins. Does that sound impossible? It should not, because it had already happened once before, and it would happen again. 10 years earlier at Yale, psychologist Stanley Milgram ran a different experiment that arrived at a disturbingly similar conclusion. Ordinary volunteers were told to administer what they believed were increasingly painful electric shocks to another person, simply because a man in a lab coat calmly told them to continue. No weapon. No threat, just a quiet authority figure saying, the experiment requires that you continue. Most people predicted almost nobody would go all the way to the maximum, most dangerous shock level. Milgram's actual results told a different story. The majority of participants did, not because they were cruel, because obedience to a system, once activated, is astonishingly hard to switch off. Your brain is not built to constantly question authority in the moment. It is built to trust structure, trust hierarchy, trust the people who seem to be in charge, because for most of human history, defying the group that fed you and protected you was far more dangerous than simply going along. Think about what a system looked like for your ancestors. A tribe had rules, roles, a leader. Survival depended on cooperation, not constant individual rebellion against the group's structure. The people who challenged every instruction, who questioned every leader, who refused every assigned role, often did not last long enough to pass on that instinct. The people who fell into line usually did. So here you are, tens of thousands of years later, carrying a brain quietly optimized to obey structure and conform to assigned roles, dropped into a modern world full of institutions, uniforms, workplaces, and hierarchies that can activate that same ancient wiring in seconds. Is it any wonder ordinary people, decade after decade, have gone along with instructions they privately knew were wrong? But here's where the story gets more complicated and more honest than the version most people have heard. Decades after Zimbardo's study, psychologists Stephen Riker and Alexander Haslam attempted something bold. They partnered with the BBC to recreate a version of the prison experiment, this time studied with far tighter scientific controls. Their results did not simply repeat Zimbardo's. In their version, guards did not spontaneously slide into cruelty. Some participants actively resisted forming an oppressive hierarchy at all. What Riker and Haslam proposed was a crucial refinement. It is not simply that a role automatically corrupts a person. It is that a role corrupts a person when that person comes to believe, deep down, that the cruel behavior is justified, necessary, or even heroic in service of the group. Zimbardo, they argued, had not just built a prison. He had, through instructions and encouragement, built an identity that some guards embraced willingly. Other researchers have gone further, uncovering audio recordings suggesting Zimbardo's staff actively coached guards toward harsher behavior, raising serious questions about how much of the original outcome was pure human nature and how much was quiet, direct encouragement. So which is it? Are humans simply waiting for permission to turn cruel? Or do humans turn cruel only once they are convinced cruelty serves a righteous purpose? The honest answer, pieced together across 60 years of psychology, is more unsettling than either extreme. You are not a ticking time bomb of cruelty waiting for a costume and a badge, but you are also not immune. What actually changes behavior is belief. Convince a person that harsh treatment is deserved, necessary, or protecting something important, and the ancient machinery of tribal loyalty does the rest. History's darkest institutional chapters were rarely built on armies of naturally cruel people. They were built on ordinary people who had been convinced, gradually, that this time, the cruelty was justified. This is not comfortable information. It was never meant to be, because it means the uncomfortable question is not, would you have been one of the cruel guards? The real question is quieter and closer to home. Have you ever gone along with something you privately disagreed with, simply because everyone around you treated it as normal? Have you ever stayed silent in a group because the role you were playing, employee, teammate, bystander, felt bigger in the moment than your own private discomfort? That is the machinery Zimbardo and Milgram uncovered, not a switch that turns good people evil. A pressure system that makes silence, conformity, and escalation feel unbelievably reasonable. One small step at a time, until the distance you have traveled from your own values only becomes visible when you finally look back. Give a normal person a uniform, a title, and permission. Watch what happens next. But watch closer this time, because the real experiment was never really about the guards in that basement. It was about how thin the line is between them and how the only real defense you have is noticing in the moment when a role is starting to speak louder than your own conscience.